Hey, Walter Sorrells back with more tips for the knife maker. Today, making a sword straightening tool. When you quench a Japanese sword, it bends. That's what gives you that cool curve. But unfortunately, they also tend to get ripples and bends that run down the blade. So you have to go back and straighten them all out. Today, I'll make a tool designed to do just that. Now, there are a ton of ways to straighten a blade. You can clamp it in a vise and yank on it, bend it over your knee, put it on a couple blocks and whack on it with a mallet. The tool I'm making today is intended to give me a little more control and precision to my straightening process. By the way, I didn't really invent the basic idea of this tool. I saw a similar gadget used by custom shotgun makers for straightening barrels and decided to adapt it. Here's the basic plan. So the basic idea is pretty simple. It's a 3-pin bender, so you have 2 movable pins on a frame that you can jump around depending on how hard a bend you want to make, and then a single bumper attached to an arm. So you slide the sword in here, then you just use the leverage of the arm to kind of bump the sword and straighten out any bends. Here are the materials we'll be using. A couple of different rounds, some square tube and a square bar, all mild steel, plus some Delrin round stock. I'll start by drilling holes in the tube on my mill. I'll start with pilot holes. Then move up to the full width, drilling them with a 3/4 inch drill. If you haven't drilled steel with large diameter bits before, cutting fluid and comparatively slow spindle speeds are a must. Here I'm on my mill's slowest speed. Next, I'll drill out 3 sections of Delrin. They'll fit over the pins. Like I said, the reason for using plastic sleeves on the pins is so you won't mar the sword. Next, I'll be turning a couple of steel pins. Basically, they'll be turned down to 750 thou on each end with a little flange in the middle so that they'll seat on the frame of the bender. Do one side. Flip it around, do the other. Quick bozo check to make sure they fit into the holes in the tube that will be the frame of the straightener. Similarly, I want to make sure that the Delrin sleeves will actually fit over the pins. I'm aiming for a nice slip fit. Hey guys, just a quick note to let you know that plans for this build, like most of my builds, are available to supporters of this channel on my Patreon page. Even if you're not a plan guy, but you just enjoy the content that I've been putting out here for over 10 years, it's hard to believe that, I hope you'll support the channel on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/Walter Sorrells or follow the link in the cards and description. All right, back to work. In the next operation, I'll turn to my Tormach CNC machine to mill out the pivot for the bender handle. I'll drill a pilot hole first. Now, I could theoretically just drill this period, but I want it to be reasonably accurate so I get a pretty smooth and accurate interior surface, and that in turn will make it turn smoothly. So, I'm using a long shank mill to bore the hole. If I were really going nuts on this, I'd ream it, but for one project, it's not worth spending several $100 on a 3/4 inch reamer. I bore it in 2 passes. The first almost a full diameter, then I'll shave off a couple thou more in the final pass for 2 reasons. First, to get a semi-decent surface finish, and also just to have a reasonably accurate bore, especially at the bottom. You don't want it tapering so that it binds up on the axle pin. Then I'll turn a 3rd pin. This will act as the axle for the bender handle. The reason I did it in this order is so that I could make sure that I got a good fit with the pivot. Quick test. Perfect. Next, we'll turn to the handle. I'll begin by forging a small bend toward the end. 2 reasons for that bend. First, it gives you some clearance so the handle doesn't interfere with your sword or your vision when you're operating the gizmo. Also, a small bend allows you to position the axis of the handle closer to the center line of the blade, which in turn allows you to apply pressure to the sword on a more perpendicular path. And that, hopefully, should result in a more accurate bend. Of course, I could cold bend this on my hydraulic press, but that would be dumb, because fire. The bending handle is mostly a welding job. I'll grind a couple of mating faces using a small grinding wheel on my belt grinder. The pivot gets welded first. I'm keeping it in the pivot seat, bearing, axle thingy, whatever you want to call it, during the welding just to prevent weld spatter from screwing up the pivot axle. Then the bumper gets welded on. And a little angle grinder cleanup for the oil pipeline quality welds. Once the handle's assembled, I'll weld on the pivot seat. The key points here are to make sure that it's vertical, that the handle swings freely, and that the little bumper surface will hit at an even point between the 2 pins. You don't want it way off center. Now we'll put it all together and make sure everything works okay. A little axle grease to lubricate the pivot. Smooth as glass. In all seriousness, it actually came out a lot smoother than I expected. Now I'll mill a slot on the sleeve for the business end of the bender. I'm putting a piece of bar stock inside because otherwise the vise will smash the crap out of the sleeve. Now I'll mill this slot out, doing several stupid things, which caused me to wreck a couple of perfectly good $30 carbide end mills. And here's the final result, slipping nicely into place. After a coat of paint, here's the result. Let's test it out on this Wakizashi fresh out of heat treat and see how it works. Just a little note on straightening. I am not a big fan of straightening swords to death. There are people who assume that making a sword super duper straight is the end all and be all of craftsmanship. I am not one of those people. The reason for this is that every time you bend the blade, you create stresses that weaken the sword. Looks pretty, but with every single bend and rebend and tweak that you do when you're straightening a blade, you're compromising the ultimate durability of the blade. It's not that a little bending is catastrophic, but less is more here. So my hope is that this will allow me to get the sword as straight as possible with the absolute fewest number of bends. So having tested it a little, I can tell you, fantastic tool, big improvement on what I've been doing in the past. All right, thanks guys, and see you soon. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and make sure that you click on that bell so you get notified of all the latest videos. Want to buy a knife from me? Check out my modern blades at tacticsarmory.com. Digging the channel? You can support our video making efforts on Patreon. You know, I've been banging away on these videos for like 10 years, so I hope you'll show some love for all that hard work. Link in the cards and descriptions. Finally, if you're interested in making Japanese swords, check out my full line of Japanese sword videos where I show how to forge Japanese swords as well as how to polish them and how to make fittings, handles, and scabbards. WalterSorrellsBlades.com.